Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast, and we are back in a pub-like environment, and we've got, people talking in the background. We've got some friends with us today, and it's going to be a great show. And today is Tom's day. But before we even get to that, let me introduce myself. I am C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I've been a college professor, a home improvement contractor, a real estate investor, and an agent specializing in small investment properties. And that's kind of scratching the surface a little bit. Anyways, I've done some stuff. And I've also written a few books. And I'm working on a book on Tom Bombadil right now, and I'm hopefully going to finish that up in a few weeks. But anyway, enough about me. So, Glenn, tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the doings. I know a lot of people are anxiously or eagerly is, I think, the better word, awaiting something that is coming forth from thee.
Yes, I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a professor of early modern European history at Central Connecticut State University and a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. And my latest book is going to be coming out on Election Day.
All right.
It's called Slaying Leviathan. It's about Protestant resistance theory and natural rights and limited government and a whole host of other things that ended up being really important at the founding of America.
Good stuff. Now, I'm going to mention that you're going to be speaking at New St. Andrews College like a few days before that.
Right, yeah. I'll be at New St. Andrews for their Reformation Day festivities on Friday, October 30th.
Yeah, we don't know any of the details at the moment, so we can't help people out. But if you're out in the Idaho area, if you're around Moscow and you're looking to be a part of something that I think will be really enriching, we'll send out Glenn. Glenn will be there, and I'm sure that they'll be able to fill you in on the times and the things that he'll be doing anyway. But Tom, why don't we turn to you? We know that you got something to share, something that's going on with the Fight Laugh Feast Network, but also it's your day. So maybe you can just introduce yourself, say what you got with the Fight Laugh Feast Network, and then tell us about what we're talking about.
Okay. It's a lot on my plate. I'm Tom Price, systematic theologian, Christian ethicist, teaching both at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and other places. And yes, I have a class that is being offered through the Fighting, Laughing, Feasting Fellows. The idea, I think the working title is Theology of Culture and Theology and Culture. It originally was Theology and Culture. But they kind of shifted it, and I kind of like the play off of those two. Actually, today I was going to be discussing at some point something very similar, theology and the humanities, theology of the humanities. So there is an important point in that. But the class is basically going to be an introduction to the fundamentals of theological analysis. Sort of what we're doing on this show, where we take a theological vision, we build up the core elements of that, what's involved in a full picture Christianity about who God is, the nature of reality, the nature of the human being, the creaturely life, social life, political life. And then we look at the ways in which there are current competing ideas and practices that come up, and the way in which these encroach upon all the institutions, especially in the West, but in the world for that matter, that eventually find their way into the church. And so how does the church grapple with these, drawing off of its own riches from its theological vision, rather than looking for just an alternative, non-Christian perspective?
Yeah, that sounds great, because one of the great challenges that any pastor faces, at least a pastor who actually has some kind of ability to think about these themes and thoughts. Oh, we got some beers arriving. All right. Thank you very much. So that is the evil monkey?
Evil genius.
Evil genius.
Evil genius, purple monkey.
Evil genius.
Dishwasher porter.
I'm going to have that next. Anyway, So I had to let you know out there in podcast land exactly what Glenn was having today.
Yep. Tom, I have to admit, when you said, how does the church deal with these things, the first thing that came to mind was very badly.
Yeah, that's very true.
And that may be exactly, that kind of will walk us into that. But before that, when you had, he ordered an evil genius, Descartes came to mind for some reason.
Right.
And then all I'm thinking about now is how to make sure that everything going on right now is not really caused by the evil genius that is.
Yeah, how do we know that this reality that we live in is not the dream of some evil genius?
So when they ask me for another beer, I should not say, I think not.
So maybe frame it a different way.
That's good.
Anyway, there's that class, and I think it's something really important, and we need it. So that's one thing. But what are we talking about today?
Well, today I'm looking at sort of a question that sort of has landed on the lap of the church. It's landed on the lap for a long time, as we'll see, but it's really starting to become often a make or break kind of, what answer you take is sort of make or break. And I think a lot of times the church's answers have been to end up breaking rather than making.
Break, right.
And, but it's sort of, what we've noticed is, as the Christian theological vision has not only been thrown out of the picture in just about every institution in the West, it increasingly is now being thrown out of the church.
Yeah.
And so church sort of was trying to carry sometimes part of the last vestiges of that culture that was lifted out of its paganism up into a fuller light of Christianity, and gave us a lot of the riches that we have and that we draw upon in learning and developing social life, political life, and really for flourishing. But also, it was the kind of an ancillary set of wisdom that helped the church carry out its mission of understanding everything in light of the Scripture. And so what do I mean by this is sort of that whole tradition of the humanities, if you will, that has now sort of...
I'm going to have an evil genius will be my next one.
And so what we sort of have is, and I'll kind of explain it fuller, is something Chuck Colson years ago, some 3 generations ago, called sort of the present dark ages that we're entering.
Now, not Chuck Colson, or are you thinking about...
the Charles Colson, Chuck Colson.
Okay, guys, because we have been talking about McIntyre earlier. Okay.
Oh, McIntyre's going to be a part of this, too.
Okay,
Actually...
By the way, since you're getting an evil genius, too, should we start calling ourselves a cabal?
Yeah, sure. Some people already do.
Good point.
Well, there's a work by Charles Colson, Against the Night, Living in the New Dark Ages, put out some years ago, and it almost mimicked some of the things that actually Alistair McIntyre, or they paralleled each other.
I see you've got the Holy Grail there.
After Virtue, especially the last chapter of that.
Right.
And the way he puts it in this book is that there's a growing sense of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Now, he was ringing this bell again 30, 40, a long time ago, and he's not the first. I mean, you had Francis Schaeffer, you have...
Sure.
It goes back to, the prophets for that matter, but...
Right.
But, and there's a crisis in the character of our culture, and this is how he puts it. The current crisis in Western culture presents the greatest threat to civilization since the barbarians invaded Rome. The time smell of sunset, he says. The encroaching darkness that casts its long shadow across every institution of our land. But he says, worse yet, there are new barbarians. And these new barbarians have basically spread out into impacting our families, the classrooms, legislatures, courts, film, studio, and now even our churches. He was saying this,
Yeah.
And so he basically said these new barbarians who now have no higher law than self-interest, who see...
Okay, we got some food arriving. So is that the... I think that's for me. Thank you. Okay, go for it, Tom.
Okay, so these new barbarians who know no higher law than self-interest, who see nothing to champion beyond their individualism, celebrating their own nihilism, and, in effect, torching the very props of culture. We live in a new dark age. Having elevated the individual as the measure of all things, modern men and women are guided solely by their dark passions. Now, I think, interestingly, and we'll see, McIntyre is going to pick up this picture, but this can kind of be filled out a little more by an article I think Dave Bentley Hart wrote for First Things back when he was writing Good Things. It was called Christ and Nothing, or Nothing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my evil genius has arrived.
And so Christ or nothing. And it was kind of almost a playoff of what McIntyre has in there, Nietzsche or Aristotle.
Right.
But what his introduction could very much fill out what Coulson was saying. He says, he puts it as modern men and women, to the degree that we are modern, we believe in nothing. We hold an unshakable, if often unconscious faith in the nothing or nothingness as such. It is this which we place our trust, upon which we venture our souls, and on which we project our values, by which we measure the meaning and the fullness of our lives. Our religion is one of comfortable nihilism. But it's worth drawing this out a little bit. He goes, we live in an age in which the chief moral value has been determined by overwhelming consensus to be the absolute liberty of personal volition. And this is sort of what Coulson is, radical individualism. Right. The power of each of us to choose what he or she believes, wants, needs, or must possess. Our culturally most pervasive models on human freedom are unambiguously voluntarist, and in a rather debased and degrading way, they're Promethean. The will, we believe, is sovereign because it has no premise. It's free because it's spontaneous. It is its own highest good. And this is what he means, is there's nothing that gives it form or direction. And as a society that believes this, must, at least implicitly, embrace and advocate a particular kind of moral metaphysics. One, the unreality of any higher reality than choice, or two, the unreality of any transcendent good or God ordering desire towards higher ends, and three, desire is free to propose, seize, accept, reject, want or not want, but not obey. And this is similar to what I think Coulson meant by the dark passions.
Now, I want to stop here and think a little bit about this, because within the evangelical world generally, I recognize all of this stuff, but it's sort of dressed up in Christian language. Mm-hmm. So people have a tendency to sort of, because they've been, say, raised in a Christian home, or they're part of a denomination that they like in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Maybe because grandma and grandpa were, members of this church, and they went to the college that the church, the denomination sponsors, and they've got lots of friends, it's really strong in social networks and stuff. But in terms of how these people understand themselves, mm-hmm. not just in terms of the relationship to that denomination, but in terms of how they relate to sort of the larger world and reality itself, per se. They're what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And some of these people have huge Twitter followings, have a lot of cachet. They're speaking in our Christian colleges and in chapel, and unless you have a really well-developed sort of BS meter, mm-hmm. You know what I'm getting at? You miss it. You think because of the enthusiasm and the warmth and all of the lingo, that everything's A-okay.
And it's interesting because David Hart mentioned that at least with the early Christians, the gods that they had to go to war with were usually tangible. You saw their practices. You were confronted with them. The hard part about nihilism and choice is they're so familiar to us, even especially in our fallen state, that you can't really put your finger on them, but yet they're everywhere. So yes, it does take radical discipleship to see all the ways in which we're invested in this, and this is invested in us.
Yeah, I'm struck by, due to some things in the news lately, the degree to which this ends up shaping language. That language, and with it, just sort of the way that we conceive of the world. You are not what you are biologically. You are what you conceive of yourself, and we have to use the language that you choose for yourself, because otherwise this is somehow a violation. Again, it's sort of a radical solipsistic way of looking at the world that means that it is my moral responsibility in our world today to acknowledge, as if real, your delusions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's it. And I think that's. David Hart was perceptive here, where he said that this has become a moral metaphysics, to the point that the reality which is accepted is basically you as your choice, and through your choice, you are basically creating reality ex nihilo for yourself and everyone else. And somehow everyone else has to both juggle the reality you're creating and yet be an agent in some way of their own creating.
Right.
And this is where we run into, I think, this is, like you say, the demise of the kind of institutions that have brought us something very different. And I think this is kind of what the warning was, this growing sense that Coulson was seeing, that Hart is noticing. And we'll get to McIntyre, but McIntyre was, noticing it as well. And it was a point of no return.
Yeah. One of the things that maybe you're going to get there, but as a pastor I deal with, is there's a sense in which many of the parishioners that I've known over the years want to narrow the range of thinking down to the spirit and its future in the next world. And they don't understand, or have very little appreciation for how even that will be taken from them if they don't have a broader vision. So what I'm getting at is this. It's my conviction, the conviction has grown over the years, that either the work of the church is making it, the culture that surrounds it, progressively more Christian, or the reverse is happening. That the culture surrounding the church is making the church progressively or regressively less Christian. There's no third option.
And that's sort of the question here is, are there possibilities within that set of circumstances? But it's interesting, David Hart mentioned this because it plays into what you say when it works the way in which the culture, and what Coulson would say with secularity is basically finding its way into the church and kind of leveling it from the inside, or bringing its rot, if you will, within, and distorting each of these things, like the family, the classroom, legislation, courts, film studios. Right. But he says this society that is built this way must be secured against any of the intrusions of the good or God, so that its citizens may determine their own lives by the choices they make from a universe that is morally indifferent, but variably desirable ends unencumbered by any power or any grammar of obligation and value. And he goes, thus the liberties that permit one to purchase lavender bedclothes, to enjoy pornography, or desiring one's own unborn child to be aborted, basically, are all considered equally intrinsically good, because all are expressions of an inalienable freedom of choice.
Right.
And so I think he's capturing this one set of one of the big pictures, or one of the big sets that this new barbarian invasion entails. We know there's more to it now. There is sort of a reaction to this hyper-individualism, but it takes a lot of the same assumptions from it, and just takes it a different way. Now, of course, Nietzsche's big emphasis was, that driving all this was what should be central to everything, but was basically masked by everyone, and that is that there's the will to power. is at the heart of everything. And so this would be one of those kind of standpoints. Now, one of the things that Nietzsche was trying to do...
Well, let's stop there a second, if you don't mind, because that's one of those things that I think people can hear, not fully sort of appreciate. So when I hear you say that, I have a sense of what you mean, but that's because I've been reflecting on it for about 30 years. For a lot of folks, it just kind of goes right by them. What does it mean for the will to power to be the most fundamental thing of all? Maybe that's a way to put it. So that means that there's no reality apart from the will of some person.
Yeah.
Which means that there are winners and there are losers. There are people who get their way and there are other people who have to go along. Now, the whole critical theory stuff begins to make a whole lot more sense.
Yeah. Well, and actually, we need to back up a little bit further. I want to go all the way back to this idea of radical freedom. This is stuff I talk about in the book. We've talked a bit about this in the podcast too, that the original concept of liberty basically pointed to, well, in Rome, liberty meant the freedom to act within the boundaries of divine and natural law and the law of the state.
Right.
Okay, so there were boundaries, you could act within those boundaries. When you add the church into that, there's an increasingly moral component to it, but you even get this in the ancient world, because the natural end of man is eudaimonia, a good, fulfilled life, a virtue, all of that kind of thing. Okay, so what happens when you lose the concept of virtue? What happens when you are living in a universe that is apathetic and amoral?
And that's what McIntyre was getting at in his title.
You immediately lose all possibility of liberty.
Right.
Liberty disappears in an amoral universe.
And Jesus implied that when he said, the truth shall make you free. There's a connection.
Right.
Most Americans believe that that is a non sequitur. They think if the truth exists, they're not free.
Yeah, I think you're right. But that's because they confuse liberty, which always operates within the boundaries of reality, natural law, divine law, and so on, and license, which was the other alternative, which is freedom from all restraint. If you don't have a moral universe, you have no liberty. You can have no liberty, and all that's left is license. You get the kind of solipsistic world that we're talking about here. Only people can't live that way, so they've either got to create one for themselves or find somebody to follow.
Right. They can dress it up in different ways, use different terms. They can talk about the general will. They can talk about follow the science, as though science has some kind of capacity to guide us morally. Science, on its own terms, this is one of the ways we know that people don't understand what science does. Some of the strongest advocates of science don't understand its limitations.
Right.
It doesn't make moral claims. It just says what the physical processes are.
Yes. This is what happens when you do this.
Right. So when we, let's talk about what we're dealing with right now. There's no actual moral guidance that we can get from the epidemiologists when they stick to their job. It's the task of the public servant, civil magistrate, to say, thank you for that information. I'll think about what I need to do in light of that. But it's not a kind of guidance. There are other things that the epidemiologist doesn't know that need to be taken into consideration as well.
Right. And have you ever considered that the people who tell you we have to do all the following because human life is so valuable, that we have to do the following even if it only saves one life, are the same people who are pro-abortion?
Yeah, there are the inconsistencies. But there are the larger, I think, set of concerns that any civic leader needs to consider. Everything from the obvious question of what about the economy? People need to eat, to how do we determine whether or not we're past this? Is it when no one is dying of this? Is it when 5 people a day are dying of it? Is there any? So you have to exercise some discretion. But then we get back to the question of, well, how do you inform the discretion? Is there some kind of larger moral frame within which to do that?
And I think all that shows, I mean, the questions you raise and you're talking about show the moral ambiguity of what has been created by a picture similar to kind of this, onset of a crisis in Western culture, if you will. Because what you have is you have this very strange affirmation, like you said, these inconsistencies, these irrationalities, if you will, where the centralization of choice, there is no reality of that. Well, all of a sudden you have something, say maybe a pandemic of something that obviously sets a certain amount of limit to one's interpretive choices, right? Okay, if this is really there and it's really impacting people, it's not whether you choose it or not, right? It might choose you without you knowing it. So all of a sudden you get this real strong, almost a crisis of its own that has entered into a picture where people are willing, therefore, to give up. It's just maybe this Hobbesian notion. They're willing to give up something of their choice being the final reality in order to have a certain safety. But I think in the end, that kind of protective safety of having a state come in and create a hyper safe zone, and they're using, like you said, science in a selective way to draw kind of almost political lines to be followed or rules to be followed. And it's, like you said, it's very arbitrary. What you have here is you have, on the one hand, a group of people who have made choice and nihil their God.
Right.
And the only thing they really have to hold on to is their existence at this point. It's the only thing they really don't have choosing capacity over.
Isn't that rich?
And that becomes something they're in a crisis over. And of course, they don't turn to God in this case. They turn to the state or power to do it. And I think it's very similar with their fear, because if you notice, for people that have centralized choice, there is this extreme fear that they have. That's why this expansion of controls. And
I'd like to think about that a little more after you're done here, but go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, you have that. I mean, I don't know if I'm very clear on that, but what I'm trying to talk about here is the way, sort of what Coulson was saying, is that the way in the celebration of individuality, of choices, and the nihil. These pride parades and all this dancing in the street over nothing, just choices, right? People make. And these big, huge, almost religious festivals over nothing at the end of the day that has no, ultimate or transcendent significance, much less even temporary significance in any meaningful way, other than just it celebrates what people have chosen to do.
Now, just as an observation, what they're asking for is unlimited personal freedom, at least in the sexual arena, enforced by government power.
Yes.
Right. So unlimited freedom enforced by government power.
Yes.
It's an intrinsic contradiction.
Yeah, and that's you said in with 2 lines what I was trying to say with 50. But that's exactly right. I mean,
that's why we love having Glenn with us.
That's right. Glenn can bring it to a close. But no, that's the big contradiction going on there. And then that is why there's this deep thirst for the Supreme Court or having the top-down enforcement of that which will allow for this maximal expression of these kinds in areas. But they're not satisfied with just the celebration. They want you to celebrate.
That's right.
And they want your children to celebrate.
Mandatory fun. It's like what I told my kids. This mandatory fun time.
Yeah. And so there is this kind
You will have fun.
That's right. That's right. But there is this point at which they don't value the choice. They value their choice.
That's it.
And that's one of the other contradictions going on here. But I think we can see at least kind of what...
Before you move on, let me just reflect a little bit on the cult of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the cult of expertise plays into this very nicely, because within the cult of expertise, you have a kind of veil of moral action, but it's veiled through this sort of pseudo-scientific objective kind of projection. There's this idea that, okay, what's going on here is just the science.
Yeah.
You know, we've all seen those signs on the front people in the lawns of people, assuming they more or less beg the question, you know, who's on the side of science? Well, obviously the Democrats are on the side of science, and anyone who's not a Democrat is against science. Well, whenever I see that kind of thing, I can say, well, you know what? I can tell where you went to college.
Yeah.
Or what you didn't learn, or what you haven't read. You don't even have an understanding of a philosophy of science.
That's right.
You have no clue what science actually does, what its limitations are, what it's good for.
Yeah, it's more of it's another slogan to make you seem like you're part of the Dark Ages and they're part of the Enlightenment, which is a strange thing because they hate science and they hate the Enlightenment. So the same people that are out there putting it out there like you have somehow violated some sacred epistemological zone, all of a sudden they're the very ones to throw it off as soon as it becomes inconvenient.
Yeah, talk to me about transgender stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's it. So, but there's this veneer, there's this facade, there's this veil, this projection of sort of rationality and scientific authority. Yeah. But it's not actually what they're after. They're not after the science, they're after the authority.
The authority. That's right.
Now, if I may point out, we started off talking about how this kind of thing affects the church.
Yeah.
And by the way, as a general note, the thing that causes corruption in the church is when it starts accommodating itself to the culture.
Right.
Yeah.
It is always when the church starts adopting the values of the culture that it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just get that on the table right away. But think about the cult of expertise and what that means in terms of who disciples our kids. It's going to be the youth pastor.
Yeah. Right.
You know, how do we do evangelism? We talk to people into coming to the church so that the pastor can win them because he's the professional.
Right. I wish they thought that way.
Wasn't there an article some years back called...
He's the only authority that we don't really have a whole lot of respect for.
But wasn't there something along this line called the de-minization of the church? The de-min, the doctrine of ministry.
Oh, right.
Remember that?
A pseudo-doctorate.
But it was that professionalization that gave it some sort of social credibility.
Right.
There was that kind of, but that I think is what Coulson and other people are kind of hinting at, is the way that they've opened the door. They opened the door to this. Carl Henry actually has some older essays, reflects on that trend in which he's reflecting on places like Wheaton and other places where you had sort of an older tradition that the way he describes it didn't have too much of an openness to the empirical, as he put it, or the experiential, if you will. And then the next generation was completely absorbing everything from the empirical sciences and everything else. But what ends up happening is rather than carrying a full theological analysis of these things, it went the other way. These empirical sciences started to be the higher authority over the theological, and the theology does the accommodating.
Oh, I've seen that right up close. I've got an acquaintance who's very tied into the biologos dynamic or what's going on with that, and you see that all over that. So I think some of these guys, they've grown up. Maybe they grew up in a very anti-intellectual, fundamentalist, Baptist kind of environment.
Yeah.
But they're bright. Now, when you grow up in that kind of environment, you tend to be kind of a literalistic and voluntaristic without even knowing that that's kind of your so you go from being kind of an artless, fundamentalist kind of reader of Scripture to an artless, fundamentalist, atheistic sort of scientism.
You run to Dawkins very quickly.
That's right. Day one you're over here with the Schofield Reference Bible. Next day you're over here with Dawkins, and I've seen it again and again and again. And what's going on with that is there's more in common between those two camps than either camp has any ability to apprehend or understand.
And I think what you already see there is because of that is because something Coulson is hinting at anyway. There is a sense in which those barbarians had gotten through to where even what looked like Christianity in a strong voice, fundamentalism, was really, a lot of.
It was already halfway down.
A lot of modernity already articulating itself in it. And, again, I think this is something that happened in many cases under the surface to where a lot of people found out only as they were already participating in it, as most people are doing. It was a stew that was cooking, it's like the frog in the kettle,
right.
slowly turning up. And then by the time you realize that all of a sudden you're reactive because you weren't ahead of the game. I think that's why what we do is so important anyway, is it's trying to keep that ahead of the game.
All right. I'm fine. So we're going to do separate checks. So he and I will have our individual checks, and they're going to be together. Does that work okay?
Fine. All three of you together?
Yep.
Yep. All right. So anyway, we've already interrupted you for enough times. Go back to what you want to say, Tom.
Well, going back, Alistair McIntyre in After Virtue said something very similar. He saw that, that there's a new dark ages of moral decay already engulfing us. And he said, despite differences distinguishing the decline and fall of the Roman Empire from circumstances in our own day, there rose nonetheless a time in the context of the Roman Imperium when Christians began thinking of alternative types of community. McIntyre then urges us to consider new forms of society that, by sustaining intellectual and moral life, will actually preserve virtue into the future. Now, we have, Dreher wrote a book, Benedict Option, that was following out McIntyre's call. That's one example of it. And I do think that book is actually worth engaging at some point, just because there are threads, I think, that are significant. And then you've mentioned before sometimes, Chris, and I think very similar. I think the Augustine may have a fuller way of doing it. I mean, if you think of the early church reaction to a lot of these things, you had the first set of the ascetics that kind of went out into the desert, moved into, they developed a lot of moral practices and virtue communities, but they didn't do the other task of actually trying to go bring all of that humanities into the light of Christ and further it as part of our deepest communion with God, and also our the light that the gospel has to bring to all of life. And I think Augustine was a figure that moved it in that direction. But one of the things I want to note here is just with that question in mind, okay, what, with the church becoming part of this nihilism, if you will, and I don't want to go into this now because we've done it in other shows, but it's not just the individualistic nihilism, but it's also the kind of woke social justice kind, which tries to assert through their will a kind of moral vision that is anchored in the arbitrary and the nihil. They're stealing capital from other worldviews, but they can't generate it just the way they're trying to.
They have no substantive vision.
And they are after creation, likewise the tearing down, terrorizing the props that have held up classical virtue, families, institutions, everything that. In the church, there's a book I'd like to engage in another show that just came out, Karl Marx in the Church. It's his move into the Protestant churches. It's a new book that just came out. The agenda.
Remember who wrote it?
Is it Kruger? I can find out actually.
Yeah, while you're thinking about that or looking into that, one of the things with Rod, it's in a way unfortunate that he called it the Benedict Option. I know he was trying to tie into, what McIntyre had said, but that set off all sorts of alarm bells for people, and the problem is that people kind of mentally shut down and didn't actually hear what Rod was saying. I know Rod.
Right. You're exactly right.
I know Rod.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of straw manism with that. But what's interesting, getting to this very thought, I was just I found this. I was stumbling along. You know how you're kind of like online. You're kind of you go to a publication for one thing and then you see something else.
Yeah.
So I went to the Critic. Which is in the UK, it's a highbrow sort of arts and culture publication that's not Christian by any stretch. But then, while I'm looking at an article there, I see a link to another article published by the Critic, entitled "Building a New Jerusalem in Idaho."
Yes, I saw that article.
Yeah, and guess who they're talking about and what they're talking about? They're talking about Moscow, and they're talking about New St. Andrews, and they're talking about the people who live there.
Yeah.
And they're actually very intrigued by it, what they observe. And they say, you know, what makes these folks tick is they're trying to build a new culture.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, right on. And anyone who's sort of trying to work with the dying culture is basically, the old, deck chairs on the Titanic illustration. I really think that's what's going on. I think that all the woke stuff is deck chairs on the Titanic. I think all the, urban church planting Kellerism is deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah,
I think all that stuff.
That's what McIntyre was saying
Wheaton,
as well.
I think Wheaton and the entire evangelical sort of superstructure, sort of the cool table of the evangelical world, it's deck chairs on the Titanic. It's going down.
Yeah, it's what McIntyre calls, when he's discussing that, and he's talking about the Benedict option in the last chapter of After Virtue. He's the one who kind of set it out there. He said it was the alternative to supporting the Roman Imperium, because the elites had basically had run it, or were running it into a place of no return. And so this is where a sort of Christian preservation of the intellectual and virtue traditions of which they were a significant part. And so the book title is The Devil and Karl Marx by Paul Kengor. He talks especially about the move.
Oh yeah,
into,
he's over at Grove City.
Yes, and he's
my daughter's at Grove City. I'm going to have her take his class.
Now, I like the Benedict option. I think that there are some really valuable things in there, but Rod's presentation is essentially defensive.
Yeah.
It's how do we protect the next generation? How do we protect our children from the depredations of the culture and all the things you've been talking about?
Yeah.
The thing that I think he gets exactly right is that if you look at church history, up to and including the Reformation, every major reform movement in the church started in a monastery.
Okay.
And if you go since the Reformation, many of the major reform movements come up in some form of intentional community, like, say, Methodist societies or something like that.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is what I said before, that the church goes bad when it adopts the values of the culture.
Yeah. Right.
When it lets the culture set its priorities. But values are formed in community.
Yes.
So you need to have some form of intentional community in order to form the values, in order to reform the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that has been the history of the church. So Rod is absolutely onto something, but what he is missing is what they've got in Moscow, the more offensive as opposed to defensive.
Right.
And I have to specify defensive here because there's another possible meaning for offensive that I don't want to imply.
Well, this
here.
is very good. This is a good move into the next thing I actually grabbed from David Bentley Hart's excellent article.
But I want to react to just something that Glenn said before you do, because there's offensive and there's offensive. I know what you're getting at, Glenn, but I think that the problem is that we are so concerned about being offensive in the bad sense that we are not offensive in the good sense.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of people take offense at Doug Wilson and people like him wrongly.
Yep.
As
far as I know, he's not had anybody put to death. Calvin did.
Well, you want a couple of names? I can from Calvin. That's.
Thank you. But you get my point. Everything looks beautiful 500 years ago, 400 years ago.
Well, the thing you have to remember is that Calvin didn't succeed in putting everybody to death that he wanted to.
And maybe he was justified, but that's another show.
but you get my point. Is that we spend all day, praising people who would have been so offensive to us, we would never want anything to do with them. If you ever read anything that Martin Luther actually said, or preached, the kinds of illustrations he used in a sermon from the pulpit would get 99% of pastors in America fired the next day.
That's funny because Karl Barth used to hide his Luther books like they were a naughty comic book or something. He would hide them. So he thought they were
And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, I strongly encourage you to go online and do a search for the Lutheran insulter.
And these are actual quotes.
These are actual quotes from Luther.
So with all this great in line, this picks right back up to Dave Bentley Hart's switch, his contra, right? For Christians, it isn't unpremised will, spontaneous, creating reality from our own choices that are only governed by our passions and interests. But it starts with the command, I am the Lord your God. This is the first reality to which our will is ordered. Read the rest of the commandments, right? You love the Lord, your heart set on the Lord first. You shall have no other gods before me, not even your choices. For Israel, this was first and foremost a demand of fidelity by which God bound his people to himself. To Christians, the commandment came through an indissoluble bound to Christ. It was not simply a prohibition of foreign cults, but an assault on the antique order of the heavens and a declaration of war upon the gods. And he goes on, all the world was to be evangelized and baptized. This is part of the commission. All idols overturned. This went with it.
Let me just stop here a second. I had a conversation with a young man in my church, and I had been preaching my way through Acts, and he said to me he had been taking some kind of online Bible study course or something like that for college credit. Mm-hmm. And he said, your reading of the book of Acts is so much more political than the thing that I'm being told in my class. Yeah. You actually say that Christ is Lord, and that's the thing that got Christians in trouble. That's not what I'm being told in my online Acts Bible class sponsored by XYZ. I don't know. You get my drift.
Yeah.
The confession Jesus is Lord is inescapably political.
Yes, that's right. Theology is inescapably political.
Well, and that's, I think, the point of the first commandment is extreme. Your ultimate loyalty, and the competitor in the world to God is worldly power, right?
But you see, the thing is most Christians today think that that's just something that goes on inside their heads.
That's right. And this is why I think David Bentley Hart is talking. The fight with nihilism is that we can't sit passively by. We have to do what Wilson does and go after the idols. And all worship turned towards the one God who, in these latter days, has sent his Son into the world for our salvation. It's going to be a bloody battle. Martyr's blood was first, but he talks about the way in which Zeus's temples, as a result, have actually been nearly vacated. Christ the Conqueror, Pantocrator, which I have a T-shirt with that. I have to wear it.
Oh, we got to get some T-shirts for the podcast with that.
We have to, but this is about that central metaphor of, I think, what Wilson is exhibiting. But this was.
Did you hear about the Boniface option?
Oh man! Oh boy, would that get us in trouble?
Yeah, we basically burn things down. We chop things up.
But
for those of you who don't know, Boniface was famous for chopping down the sacred oak tree to Thor.
That's what we do. That's what we do, baby.
Well,
that's evangelism.
Yeah. Now, actually, there's a story I could tell about that one, but we'll skip that for the moment. The interesting thing about this is that when you understand this, when you understand the concept of Christ's lordship and everything that it means, among other things, what it tells you is that all of the things that are going on in the world around us that tend to get our knickers in a twist aren't important, because they are all going to be taken care of in the end. That doesn't excuse us from doing our job and trying to promote the good, the true, and the beautiful and Christ's lordship and things like that.
Right.
But it means we can relax.
Yeah.
We don't really need to worry about it. We have to fight.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with laughing and feasting too.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, and you have been quoted a few times. I don't know if you realize this about your characterization of the singing at the Fight, Laugh, Feast conference. What was it again, the term used?
It wasn't just the singing, it was the entire atmosphere, militantly joyous.
That's what we're getting at here. We can fight, but the reason we're joyous is we know we win.
Right.
Yeah. There's no doubt that we win.
Yeah. That's right. And there is something, they used to always, even Karl Barth in the face when he was at risk with preaching the gospel, during the time of Nazism and stuff. They always said when he was confronted with the question of evil, he just shrugged his shoulder.
Yeah.
I mean, that was he at a time where everyone else was bent out of shape by the extremities. It was he was that same kind of confident joy. That's why, like Mozart, is someone too who, even in the melancholy and the tragedy, could still play like he's just
that's one of
surfing.
the things that I limed and brought, sort of saw sort of beneath the surface, bubbling up in Bombadil. Here's a guy who's the master, and he lives, in a really bad neighborhood, right between the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs. So he's like right between the perilous land and a graveyard, haunted graveyard,
and worse, haunted graveyard. He is literally on the edge between a very dangerous kind of life and living stuff and a very, very dangerous kind of dead and undead.
That's right. And throughout the Lord of the Rings, and this is one of the things that has struck me, is that Tom makes an appearance in terms of a reference at very critical moments. So like when Sam is in and Frodo are in Shelob's lair, what does Sam say? I wish Tom were here right now. It happens several times throughout the course of the story. So this is not like a character that's just some sort of off, sort of distraction or detour or just something to add a little color or diversion. He's integral to the whole story. But
actually, that quote that you posted on Facebook, where Tolkien is saying, I knew about Tom Bombadil, but I didn't know about Bree. I didn't know about Strider. I had no idea who he was when he appeared. All of these different things. He knew about Tom.
Yep. Yeah, he already had talked about Tom and written about Tom.
Knew him well.
That's right. Right. Anyway, so I'm sorry to take you.
No
down
worries.
that road.
So I think one of the things that questions I'm saying is, I understand what Rod's up to. I understand what McIntyre's saying, and I understand the necessity of this. That those of us concerned with a full vision of the gospel, that it entails the preservation of creaturely goods that are in the service of the gospel, the whole of creation, if you will. That we bear a responsibility because of redemption for the preservation of these things. But one of the things I think in stepping out, what kind social forms will they take, and what kind of common life as Christians will we share? One of the things I think that has to be integral is this aspect of what you just mentioned, that we're in spiritual war. And I think this is the reason I mentioned Bentley. He said, when a Gentile convert stood in the baptism at Easter Eve before entering the waters, they turned to the west and they denounced the devil and the devil's ministry.
Isn't that interesting? When was the last time you've heard that done at a baptism?
That's right. And then it's in saying so, they're rejecting and in fact reviling the gods who had held them in bondage in this life. And in turn to the east to confess Christ, they're entrusting themselves to the invincible hero who has plundered hell and its captives, overthrown death, subdued the powers of the air, and has been raised as the Lord of history. Life for the early church was spiritual warfare, and no Christian could doubt how great a transformation of the self and world it was to consent to serve the God who was revealed in Christ and no other. So here's the last point. The situation of the church has materially changed, but spiritual warfare is something intrinsic to the gospel.
That's it. I know a lot of well-meaning people who think that it's sort of an extra thing. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of unnecessary sort of, if you're into that kind of thing, then you can go and do that. But the gospel is not really about that kind of stuff. But what you just said is that, no, it is. This is about this real estate that we're living in right now, we're fighting over. This is gospel ministry.
And when you had mentioned previous episodes, and you did some sermons on it, that talk about how radical the resurrection is and how everything is banked on it, but it's because it has plundered hell.
Right.
It has overcome death, and then it does give us, and this is why the feasting and the laughing can happen, we're working out of resources of victory already. And so the question now is, this is Christ's territory, and we're making claim to it. And so there is, and this is what I'm saying, when we move to having to preserve certain things, we cannot lose. It's not merely about saving the phenomenon. It's about bringing that stuff back into its proper relation to a polemical, spiritual battle that both the humanities, if you will, and all the institutions that have been impacted by false gods are brought back into and battled back into a full picture of the gospel.
Now, to take that,
I'm all set. I think we're actually pretty good here. I think we had told the waitress who was with us before that we were, ready to divide up the check. Great, thanks, Ethan. So anyway, I got to. Okay, I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Where I was going to go is, it's interesting when tying this spiritual warfare and the other things we've talked about in the Gospel of Luke, in the account of Jesus' temptation. Satan shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world in all their glory and says, "All this I will give to you, for it is mine to give,
Right.
if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus, of course, tells him where to stick it. But the point here is that Jesus didn't dispute the fact that the kingdoms of the world in their glory are in Satan's hands.
Right.
What Satan was offering Jesus, and this is the same thing when Peter says, rebukes Jesus and says, "No, this isn't going to happen to you." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." In both cases, what was going on is Jesus was being presented with the option of a shortcut.
Right.
Yeah.
He's going to get all the kingdoms of the world in all their glory, but he's going to do it God's way rather than taking the shortcut that Satan or Peter has to offer.
And that raises a very awkward question in my mind.
And that's exactly where I think I'm going. The problem is that the church is busy looking for the kingdoms of the world with a shortcut.
That's it. So I have a suggestion for the title for the episode. I don't know if you already had one.
No, I don't have a title.
The Boniface Option, in honor of our friend Doug Wilson.
Send it to Caleb. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah.
But I think getting to this point, in the sense that, okay, here we have this battle going on. We've been kind of dipping in a little bit to the the story of Middle Earth and all that kind of thing. One of the things that I wrestle with is the question of how many combatants do we have? In other words, are there people who are on the right side but are not combatants? I'm not saying they're not supportive or anything like that, but I think about examples in Scripture. Think about Gideon. Mm-hmm. Okay, send a bunch of people home. Okay, send even more home. That kind of thing. Yeah. And I think about like the, getting back to the Lord of the Rings and the Middle Earth, the Shire. The Shire, yes, it does suffer before the end of the story, but for the longest time, there are people who are protecting the Shire so it can enjoy its shireness.
Yeah.
Rangers, and then we have Frodo and, of course, his companions who go off. Why do they go off? To protect the Shire. Yeah. So there's a sense in which I'm not saying this is what the Bible says. This is just kind of my sort of way of dealing with a kind of reality on the ground. I have a lot of people that I love and care about who are completely oblivious. I mean, utterly oblivious to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
They're hobbits.
Yeah.
They really are. They're good people. I like them. I want them to enjoy their gardens. I want them to enjoy their lives. But I really don't expect much when it comes to the fight from them.
Yeah.
On the other hand...
Chris, before we go any further, I just want to point something out.
Sure.
When the hobbits are going back, I believe it is Gandalf who says something to them to the effect of, very bad paraphrase here, but all the things that have happened...
Together, right?
Those three together.
All right. Excellent. There's three of you. That one's for you.
Great, thank you.
All the things that have happened to prepare the hobbits to go back.
Right.
So, in other words, it isn't just all the big stuff in Middle-earth that matters.
Right.
The destruction of the ring was as much about preparing the hobbits for the scouring of the Shire than it was defending all of Middle-earth.
And isn't it kind of interesting that it's already after the big battle's over that they finally get a chance to play their part, sort of the
Right.
mop-up operation.
Yeah.
I guess the reason I think about this is that as a pastor, I have to be, I think, in a sense, realistic about what I should expect. Now,
Well-
I'm hopeful.
Yeah,
But-
I do think there. I mean, it's like I think maybe one of the things, and this is the point. You know, when I'm talking about common life, you know, I'm talking in terms of our connection to. Thank you. Even as even in the Reformed confession, as our commitment to one Catholic Church, small c.
Right, right.
Is this notion that part of the history of understanding what baptism was all about is that everyone who is affirming Christ's lordship is entering a spiritual battle. And I do think
But most of them are thinking in terms of their personal salvation.
and this is where I think Coulson is saying that something dark has entered, and I think McIntyre too has entered our churches.
Right.
It came under a kind of piety of, okay, you have a certain kind of communing life with God, which there's space for that.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And there's space for that. But I think what happens is it becomes everything.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
They have zero capacity for appreciating the larger story.
Yeah.
And even when I point again and again, I've done this for years.
Yeah.
There's a kind of, I don't know, blank stare.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? I thought this was about my personal salvation.
Yeah.
I didn't know that everything in the world was thrown in when Christ died.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not just one stray verse here and there. Even
Everybody's favorite verse, John 3:16.
right,
Yeah.
right,
God so loved the cosmos,
Right.
is the word in Greek.
right, right. But most of them, when they hear that,
Yeah.
they're thinking individuals, an aggregate of individuals. God so loved all these
Yeah.
individuals. They don't think about the order, which is what cosmos is getting at, the God established order that God is
Yeah.
redeeming.
Yeah. Well, and this has been, sadly, this is part of what has weakened the church as a virtue institution and as a community that cultivates the kind of virtues that sustain a people through these kinds of moments, And I think that's sort of what Coulson and McIntyre are onto. And so, yeah, that's its own set of issues, I mean, there's the pastoral concerns of how do you bring people into a full theological vision of Christianity. And I know people like the simple solution. Well, scripture. Well, this is the problem. They're reading scripture from a non-scriptural frame, but that scriptural frame, is what we're talking about. The theological. When I say theological vision, I'm talking about the frame that theology gives us of reality. That is the one in which we read the scriptures.
But
in.
most of the people that come to the Bible have no idea that they're approaching it from the frame of radical individualism.
That's right, and
they assume that that's just sort of like the nature of things.
And so that has so softened the ground, and like this is where Coulson wasn't yet because it hadn't hit, but this is so soft in the ground that it created the set of conditions that allows now the new wokeness and the rest to come in because it adopts a lot of that vision, but it's also a critique of that vision. And then the church gets brought in to be critiqued because it seems to be supporting that vision that is being rejected by the woke group. And this is what I'm saying about what you're seeing is not just the church and the gospel being impacted, and then the church is dividing, but what you're doing is you're also risking losing in churches the capacity to be able to be places of genuine intellectual and virtue formation in the gospel.
Yeah, they're substituting this woke stuff. They think that's serious business.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should probably kind of wrap up, and I want to move from the sublime to the ridiculous. Why is it, Lynn? So Glenn's wife, Lynn, is with us. That waitresses have these funky color pens. So why is it that I when she gives me her pen, it's this lime green thing, or
So
it's
that
this
you
pink
don't walk
thing?
out
Don't
with
walk
it.
out with you. See,
I have to break out
you
my
would take
black
this one. You
ink
would take
pen.
that.
But what is going on with
Yeah.
I use it and I say, no, I'm not going to use that to
No,
sign
you
my
would
name.
you would walk with that. But yeah, this one you'll at least question. Yeah.
That's why you have the little it's lime green. It's lime green. Anyway,
There's a
Lynn
metaphor there.
Lynn is testing to see if I'm actually telling the
There's a
truth.
metaphor there, but it's not that the gospel should be wrapped in lime green so that people know how to distinguish it from everything else.
Well, with that thought, we should probably say goodbye because we have gone our standard hour plus. And it's been a fun conversation, and we really do appreciate you listening to the Theology Pugcast. By the way, we want you to know how things are progressing in certain areas that some of our listeners have given some good hard-earned money to support. We're in the process of getting our new website off the ground. So anyway, those of you who have given to the Indiegogo campaign, you've received hopefully your T-shirt or your glass or both. But we've got our mics, as you know, and we're at work getting the website developed, and it's going to be really good. But it's not up yet. But we want you to know it is in the works, and it's soon to be available to you, because we know that people look for resources. They look for stuff to link, or links to things that are referenced in our discussions. I just saw this last week. People were wanting to know about some of the things that Zmirak, had talked about last week. And, if we were to link everything that Zmirak said, it would be like pages and pages of a hyperlink, But anyway, but we want to do better with that. But it's in the works. We wanted you to know that. So anyway, anything you want to say, Glenn, as we wrap up?
Yes, well, as long as you brought up the fact that Lynn is here, I want to just acknowledge her restraint at not calling on you to finish the other trilogy.
That's right. I heard about the conversation she had at the Fight Laugh Feast Network with people at the booth. Anyway, that's something I need to work on. Anything else you want to say, Tom?
No, I can't beat that.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening to the Theology Pugcast. We really appreciate your interest and support. As we've said many times, we're astounded at the size of the audience, and we just appreciate that people care about what we care about. So thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.